Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's only been a few weeks since my last video, so I'm not doing too badly. I have decided today to do the unpopular opinions book tag. This has been sort of making the rounds. I will put a link to the video that I was watching down below. It was from J Book Lover. I was watching her video and I basically just wanted to share my own thoughts on the questions that were being asked. So standard disclaimer, this is obviously just my own opinion. If you like something that I don't like, or I like something that you don't like, that's all fine. We're all allowed to have different opinions. Life is a rich tapestry, etc. I just thought that this would be fun to do. So the first question is a popular book or series that you don't like. So I went with the Divergent series for this one. I read all three of them. I barely finished the third one. I was stuck in the middle of it for months, I think. I don't know exactly how long. I eventually finally picked up the third one and finished it because of the movies that were coming out. The second one was coming out and I was honestly just going to record a podcast episode on the series, so I knew that I should probably finish the books. So I did eventually finish it. I didn't like it. The first one I thought was interesting. The second one I thought her cracks in the world building were starting to show. Things weren't always making sense. I thought that the end of the first book was completely rushed. I thought that the second book, again, the ending made absolutely no sense. And then the third book just completely crumbled. Her world building made no sense. There was no satisfying conclusion. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I thought that that was kind of nonsense too. Just everything about it didn't work for me. Mostly the faults in the world building and the science that she made up for the whole series just really bugged me because that's not how any of that works. The next one is a popular book or series that everyone else seems to hate but that you love. I had a lot of trouble with this question because the thing is, with popular series that everyone seems to hate, I don't generally end up reading them if I know that people hate them beforehand, because if I read them there's only like two options of what's going to happen. The first one is that I hate it just like everyone else did, and then I've spent all this time reading something that I didn't like and I would much rather just read things that I do like, or I like it but then I don't have anyone to talk about it with because everyone else seems to hate it. Neither of those is fun for me or something that I want to do, but that having been said, I feel like a series that didn't get the kind of acclaim that I thought it deserved was the Graceling series by Kristen Cashore. So I think most people liked the first one, but I think a lot of people didn't really know what to do with the second and third one because they're very different in tone to the first book and they have very different types of heroines in their books. So Fire and Bitter Blue are very different characters from Katza? What is her name? Yeah, Katza. So Graceling is the first one, and then it is followed by Fire, and then it is followed, concluded rather, by Bitter Blue. And I think just a lot of people wanted a different kind of story than they ended up telling. Particularly, I think a lot of people didn't really know what to do with Bitter Blue because it's really about recovering from trauma, and that is a difficult narrative to sell people on, I think. There's not necessarily a bad guy in it. It's more like just people's own guilt and, you know, like there's survivor's guilt, there's, you know, things that they were coerced into doing that they regret, and a lot of it is just coming to terms with their own past, and that's, I think, a difficult novel to sell people on. But I loved it because when I was reading Graceling, I was just wondering what the heck was gonna happen afterwards, because there's this villain in Graceling that's so menacing and so coercive and frightening, and I just didn't know how they were going to recover from that. And so having an entire book about how difficult it was to recover from that, I think was actually what the series needed, but I think that a lot of people disagreed with that because there's a persistent sense of grief and melancholy in the books, and I really appreciated it. I mean, I find it really rewarding to read about the rebuilding process, including how messy and complicated and painful it can be. So I really loved the series. I think a lot of people didn't really know what to do with it. So the next question is a love triangle where the main character ended up with the person you did not want them to end up with, or an OTP that you don't like. So I actually don't really have any love triangles where they've ended up with the wrong person because I feel like usually the author has built it in there pretty clearly where you can see where it's gonna go. There were probably moments where I realized about halfway through the book which one she was gonna end up with and I went, oh, alright, fine. You know, I was slightly disappointed by that, but you know, then the next half of the book managed to sort of convince me that this was the right choice. However, for an OTP that you don't like, I guess Noah and Mara from the Mara Dyer trilogy. I've talked about this before, but I just really didn't find them that convincing as a couple. I thought that their chemistry was really lacking throughout the whole series, and I think it would have bothered me less except that the series was really trying to sell me on how much of a love story they were, and I just didn't really buy it. I think that was really mostly my problem with it. It would have been just kind of fine if it had been like a subplot, but they kept trying to convince me that it was the main plot when there was stuff that was way more interesting happening. The next question is a popular book or genre that you hardly reach for. So I actually have two for this one. The first is nonfiction. I almost never read nonfiction. Every once in a while I'll read a memoir, but even when I read memoirs, I tend to not like them that much. So nonfiction just is kind of not my thing. I'm gonna try to find some nonfiction that I like, so actually, if you have any recommendations for nonfiction that you really like, please leave it down below. Keep in mind that my preferred nonfiction would kind of read like a novel, since that's mostly what I read. And the other things that I don't generally reach for are adult contemporary and adult sci-fi. I read a lot of young adult sci-fi, but I find that adult sci-fi as a whole, again, I'm speaking very generally, I know that there are exceptions to this and that it's all on a gradient, but as a whole, adult sci-fi is very hyper-masculinized, and that's not really my thing. Young adult sci-fi tends to be a lot more female-focused, and so I will read young adult sci-fi, but again, adult sci-fi tends to just be a lot of boys with guns, boys with spaceships, boys with medical advances, etc. You get what I'm saying. So the next one is a popular or beloved character that you do not like. So I went with 4 from the Divergent series. Like, he's fine, but he like got a whole book about his backstory that's just like short stories from his point of view, and I will not read it because I do not care. So the next question is a popular author that you can't seem to get into. So I went with Cassandra Clare's Immortal Instruments series. I tried to read the first one. I found it unreadable. I've heard that they get better. I've heard that the first one is by far the worst one, but I just thought the first few chapters were so bad that I couldn't continue. And I haven't really heard anything compelling enough to make me rethink that and made me think that it might be worth trying to get through the first book. I just have a life is too short to read bad books policy. I'm just not interested. So the next question is a popular book trope that you're tired of seeing. They have some examples of this, like Lost Princess, Corrupt Ruler, etc. I went with love triangles, but I have a very specific thing to say about love triangles, which is not that all love triangles are terrible. They're not. The ones that I dislike are the ones that are love triangles that are specifically used as a shorthand for character growth and for a struggle between different value sets, and you know what I'm talking about. The ones where, like, boy A is this one worldview and boy B is this other worldview, and she's like trying to choose between them, and it's not really so much about their chemistry, it's about which value set the author prefers. I find it incredibly insulting to the reader. I think it's incredibly obvious which one she's going to end up with, and I also think that it narrows down women's choices in life to just choosing between two men, and I find that insulting. I think that it's cheap, and I think that it's tired, and I'm really sick of seeing it. Now, that does not mean, again, that all love triangles are terrible. There have actually been some where I've been genuinely unsure which one she was going to end up with and genuinely interested in seeing who she was going to end up with, but overall, I think when they are used as a cheap shorthand, it is offensive to the reader. So the next question on here is a popular series that you have no interest in reading. So with this one, I went with Sarah Moss, Throne of Glass, I think is the first one. I started this one, read the first couple chapters, and realized that it was just not gonna be the book series for me. It's possible that it gets better after the first few chapters. This is kind of similar to my Cassandra Clare situation. It's possible that it gets better after that, but there were things like she gets out of prison in the first few chapters, and she's mostly just concerned with the fact that she isn't pretty anymore because she's like lost weight because she was slaving in the salt mines. I'm like, that would not be most people's primary concern when they'd just gotten out of jail. So again, I'm totally open to the idea that they get better after that. It might just have been a rough start, but just not for me, I think. So the ninth and final question is, the saying goes, the book is always better than the movie, but what movie or TV show adaptation do you prefer more than the book? So for this one, probably not a huge surprise, it is The 100. I have been reading this series. I'm about halfway through book 3 right now, and it's just not as good. There's so much complexity in the characters in the TV show that I just love that is mostly missing in the books. Like, there are characters that in the TV show start out as somewhat of a stock villain villain and then evolve throughout the show and become much more interesting later on. And in the books, it's pretty clear that they're just going to be that stock villain. There's not really going to be any further development of them. And there's a lot of instances in the books of people committing terrible acts to protect the one person that they love romantically, which in the show is instead translated to people committing terrible acts to protect their whole in-group, their whole community. And to me, that is way more interesting, and we've seen that narrative way less, particularly that it's often women making these decisions that, you know, have terrible repercussions, but it's to protect their community. And so that narrative is way more compelling to me, and the books are just a little bit more melodramatic, they're a little bit less developed, which is usually the opposite. Usually characters are way more developed in books than they end up being on film or, you know, TV adaptations, but I guess because the TV show has 2 whole seasons and the book is just a trilogy, and it seems like the TV show carries on a lot more, they had more time to develop the characters. I just wish that the book had had a little bit more depth to it. I don't hate the books, but I think that the TV show is genuinely better, and that's not something I usually say. So that is the end of the Unpopular Opinions book tag. I hope I didn't offend too many of you. Feel free to do this tag though. I would love to hear your opinions, even if you disagree with mine, in fact particularly if you disagree with mine. And if you are gonna do it, please let me know down below. Again, I would love to see your videos. Also, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned today, please leave a comment down below. If you want to try to convince me to read something that I said that I hadn't read or had no interest in reading, feel free to try. I can't promise that it'll work. Other than that, I think that that's going to be it for today, but thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!